All right, we are in Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 25. Give a quick recap, somebody. Quickly, where were we last week? What are some of the things we talked about last week? Nobody remember?
Well, we talked about meditation,
Yes.
and I think without meditating, what meditating is.
Right. That's right. We talked about a number of things that relate to what that entails. The Word of God, the laws of God, the promises, the blessings, where God has, led in the past, where He's leading in the future. So absolutely. So we talked about that. What else did we talk about?
We talked about providence, how God was moving behind the scenes with Rebecca.
That's right. What is the difference between God providentially working behind the scenes and God working miraculously in front in your face? What's the difference?
One's seen, one's unseen.
Okay, absolutely. What book of the Bible kind of demonstrates the providence of God, maybe in a clear way?
Book of Esther.
Esther, yeah. You see God's hand there. You just don't see it in your face, But as you look through the whole stream of what's going on, you see clearly God is in control and He's working behind the scenes. But it's not the same as the crossing of the Red Sea, right? I mean, miracles, right? It's not the same as the 10 plagues. It's not the same as multiplying, fish and loaves for 5,000 men and things of that nature. So it's behind the scenes. God's still working. You can see His hand working, but it's not in your face. All right. Anything else we talked about that jumps out at you? Can you love somebody you just met? Yeah, we talked about that, right? Isaac loved Rebekah, and biblical love may or may not have feelings, but what is biblical love?
Unconditional, selfless.
Okay, selfless. Okay, agape. Action. Yeah, biblical love is an action.
Tom had never met my daughter, and they were at a wedding. She was on one side of the room, and he was on the other, and he looked over and said, "I'm going to marry her."
Okay, yeah. Love is an action. Love does things. So Isaac could easily have loved Rebekah without having any kind of emotional feelings or attachments or anything. Now, he may very well have. She was beautiful and all of that. But the point is that love is an action word. He was going to be a loving husband. He was going to do loving things for her. Okay. If there's nothing else, let's look at 25. Let's read chapter 25, 1 through 6. Who wants to read verses 1 through 6?
I'll read it.
Okay, go for it.
Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him. Oh, I picked a good one.
Yeah, you did. See, I didn't say anything. Everybody else was looking and said, no, not me.
Okay, we'll go for it. Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Ashura, Letushim, and Luminum. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldad. All these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. But the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still living, he sent him away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. He didn't name these kids very well.
For them, it's like Sam and Joe and Mike and, For them, these are normal names. Yeah, for us, it's quite tough. See, next time you're gonna look ahead and be like, no, I'm not reading that. We're going to let James do that all by himself. Did a good job. All right, so how many children does he end up having by Keturah?
6.
All right, so how many children total?
8.
does he have? He has 8. He has 8 children total, right? You got Isaac, you got Ishmael. Now, what do we learn in verse 5? What do we learn in verse 5 here?
They didn't get anything.
They didn't, well, they got
Yeah.
a little bit to live on, right? They got some stuff that they could live on, but basically they did not get everything, right? They didn't get the inheritance.
But right after that, it says he gave gifts to the sons, more than one, of the concubines. So did he have more than 8? Did he have other children?
This brings up a good thought. There are some different theories on this. Who was Abraham's wife according to promise? According to who Isaac, who the promised child was going to come to was Sarah. Was Hagar meant to be his wife? No, right. God hadn't done that. And Keturah is another one. So there's a couple different views. Some look at this and say the concubines were other. There were more women that he had. I don't think that's right. I think this is making the distinction between Sarah and Hagar and Keturah.
Even though it does say he took Keturah as his wife, because
Yes.
him and Hagar never actually married.
Who? Him and Hagar?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they are. Yeah. She gave Hagar to be his wife. Sarah gave. Yeah. But there's a distinction that I think goes on. Keturah is mentioned later on. If I knew we were going to go here, I would have had that reference. But it's in like First Chronicles, and she is referenced as a concubine. So the text does go back and forth between using the term wife and concubine, but I think that in my view, I think that there's a distinction. I don't think he had more children. I think this is just talking about these children. And I don't think he had more wives. I think it's talking about these 2 wives. Otherwise, it would be interesting that the other concubines were not mentioned, and neither were their children by name when everyone else is. It'd be interesting. It's not like it's impossible to happen, but I take this as a distinction between, even though she's called his wife, a distinction between Sarah and between Hagar and here Keturah. A recognition that there's some kind of a distinction. That's the way I view it. In the end, I'm not sure if this is more than a point of interest. It's interesting. I'm not sure if it matters much if he had other concubines and other children, right? Versus just Hagar and Keturah. I would find it, again, interesting that they're not named, that there's nothing mentioned. But again, I think in context it's talking about Keturah and it's talking about these children here, these boys. Good question to bring up. All these, sometimes there's some interesting things and we don't get a whole lot of information. But as with a lot of theological discussion and things that are not pointed out, somebody once said you could have 10 theologians in a room and ask them a question and you'd get 13 answers.
Yeah.
And tonight you just got 2 from one guy, right? That's what happens. So what's going on in verse 5? These children, there's a distinction. See, this again, I think this is why there's a distinction with these wives. There's a distinction made between these children and who? Isaac. Absolutely, Isaac. And what? Go ahead.
James, do you think maybe that this extra gift to Isaac was the same thing as earlier when the extra blessing was? I'm getting ahead of it. Later, we're going to read about Jacob.
Okay. Don't jump ahead now.
Where his brother says, "Don't you have something for me?"
Yes.
Dad,
Yeah, that's
and he had given everything to Jacob.
That's right.
he
That's right.
did, there is something left for these guys, but
Esau.
yeah.
Yeah. Abraham does not give these children the inheritance. They receive a bit that they can live on. He gives them some support. But there's a distinction made, and Isaac gets everything, it says. He gets everything. If you had children in the ancient world, it didn't matter as a husband, as a father, it didn't matter if it was by 3 or 4 or 6 or 10 wives, you would divvy up your inheritance among however many children you had. And you would end up giving a double portion to the firstborn. So if you had 5 children, you divvy it up, your inheritance, to 6. That makes sense? And you'd give 2 to the firstborn, and then the rest would get a portion of that. But they're not getting any of that. And where did they get sent? East. What does the east sometimes, not always, but sometimes symbolize in the Bible?
Away from God.
Away from God. I think there's some symbolism here. They are away from the promises of God. Only Isaac will receive the promise. Only Isaac will receive the covenant. Only Isaac will get that blessing. So I think that I think they literally went east, but I think there's some symbolism going on here where they are moving away from, and they are not going to be part of the people of God. They're not part of the plan that God has for Isaac. So they're moving away, they're moving east. Now, Isaac gets everything because he is the firstborn. Now, he's not literally the firstborn of Abraham's seed, right? He would be the first trueborn. There is a concept in the Bible about the firstborn, and this is a big issue. You'll see it come up a lot in the law. Those of you who are reading through Exodus and Leviticus and soon Numbers and Deuteronomy and all that, you'll see this firstborn, this first fruits, all of these kinds of things. The Exodus, God takes, on the night that he's about to release his people from Egypt, what does he do?
Kill the firstborn.
He kills the firstborn. He kills the firstborn. What does the firstborn mean biblically? What does it mean? What does it symbolize? What does it represent?
Well, did that person take their place as head of the family?
Yeah. In some ways, absolutely. Firstborn had some kind of, yeah.
Was under the old law the firstborn to be dedicated to God?
Right, once you get to the law and God takes the people of, and this is earlier than that, but there's some foreshadowing and some things. God takes Israel out of Egypt. He kills all the firstborn. He says, the firstborn of your cattle, of your children, the firstborn that open up the womb, right? The first one will be dedicated to me. Of animals and such, you need to sacrifice them to me. And of children, you need to simply redeem them. Buy them back. They belong to me, but you will buy them back. So your children, you paid a sacrificial price to buy them back because the firstborn was given to God. The firstborn was special. It was the firstborn, and we'll just talk about children for the moment, but the firstborn was special. They were preeminent. The concept of preeminent is contained within this theme of the firstborn. Now, you did not have to be physically firstborn to be considered the firstborn. That's important to keep in mind. Because, it's important for a lot of reasons, but if you ever talk with Jehovah's Witnesses, Jesus is said to be the firstborn of all creation. They say he's the first one created. That's what it means, because the firstborn was the first one to open the womb or whatever. Not always true. Firstborn means preeminent or special, unique. There's something different about this one. Let's prove that. Let's look at Exodus chapter 4:22 for a moment. Somebody want to read Exodus 4:22? Well, let me get two readers. Who wants to read Exodus? 4:22. Can you read Colossians 1:15? So as soon as you're there, Shannon, whenever you're ready, read that, and then Paul, Colossians 1:15 after that.
Then say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn son.
Okay, so the nation of Israel is called God's firstborn son. They're unique, they're special, they're preeminent among all the nations. Doesn't mean that they were the first nation created or the first people created. It means that they are special or unique. Go ahead, Paul.
He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation.
That's Jesus. Okay, again, unique, special, preeminent. When he says he's the firstborn over all creation, it means he is superior to, he is preeminent over all creation. Let's have two more people who want to read. Who wants to read? You'll try. You'll try.
I see it very well, but
Okay, Genesis chapter 41, verse 51. I need one other person. Jeremiah 31:9. As soon as you have that, Gail, go for it, and then right after that,
how many verses again?
41:51. Genesis 41:51, and Jeremiah 31:9 is the second reading.
Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household."
So who's the firstborn?
Joseph.
Manasseh. Manasseh. He literally is the firstborn. Go ahead, Luther.
And they shall come with weeping, and with supplications I will lead them. I will cause them to walk by the rivers of waters in a straight way in which they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn.
But I thought Manasseh was firstborn. So Manasseh and Ephraim are born.
Got the blessing of the firstborn.
See, Ephraim is called firstborn, preeminent, special, something different, superior, something along those lines. You can take these scriptures down. We won't read them. But 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 10 through 11. And with that is Psalm 89, 20 through 27. And I'll tell you what those two passages, they are talking about David. Now, in birth order, where did King David, where did he fall? He was the last, right? But in Psalm, it says David is God's firstborn. He is named the firstborn. So again, we need to remove ourselves from the concept that firstborn always means literally the first one in a line, the first one. It means something different than that. Now, often when God in the law is talking about give me the firstborn of the cattle or the firstborn that open your womb, he's talking literally the firstborn, but it's symbolic of something else. It's symbolic of something else. So preeminence is what's going on. So Isaac is not literally the first child born, but he is the firstborn. He is preeminent. He is special. He is unique. He is the one that through him God is going to bring about the Christ, the Messiah. And in fact, God is not even going to recognize the others. When God says to Abraham, I want you to take Isaac, he says, I want you to take your son Isaac, your only son. Hebrews, the Hebrew writer quotes that, and it says the same thing, your only son. Something unique about Isaac. Isaac was the son of promise. Isaac was the child from the union of Abraham and Sarah. Here again, I think, is why the concubines and the issue with Keturah and Hagar is distinguished. There's a distinction made there. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand what's going on there? Firstborn means preeminent, special, unique. And of course, this is all pointing us forward to Christ, to Jesus, right? He is the firstborn over all creation, firstborn from the dead, all of that. Oh, and just a side note, as I brought that up, Jesus was not literally the first one raised from the dead.
No.
He raised the widow's son from Nain. He raised his friend, right? There were other people who raised. Now, he is the first one to rise immortal, never to die again. But again, firstborn means that he is the preeminent one. He's number one, you could say, right? He's number one. So the firstborn means that. Number one, superior, unique. Keep that in mind, because that's a theme that goes throughout the scriptures. All right, so Abraham gives gifts to his these other children. He sends them away. They are not going to inherit any of the promises. And they go east, symbolic of going away from God's presence, going away from God's blessings, going away from God's promises, at least in relation to his covenant made through Abraham, Isaac, and going to be future to Jacob and all of that. Anything else in there before we move on that you want to talk about? Mostly it's a kind of a genealogy, a lineage kind of going on, but anything else in there? There are some important things to look at, but
Why do you think he sent them away? Is it not to not give Isaac any trouble, or what?
yeah, he is going to try to prepare a place for Isaac that there won't be any competition, there won't be any struggling. When parents die, what can happen with the family, the children? Falls apart. I remember when my grandparents died, they had 6 girls, and those girls fought like cats and dogs over nothing. My grandparents had nothing, but they fought over it for different reasons, emotional attachments or whatever. I want to be considered important, or I should have this or that or whatever. So Abraham is making sure that doesn't happen. There's a separation. They are not going to inherit, and I think he's trying multiple things. Clearly, you're not going to be part of this promised lineage kind of thing, but also to give Isaac the best opportunity without all these rivals, right? He's already got Ishmael, and they're all in this area floating around. So I think that's why. If nothing else, let's look at verses 7 through 11. Somebody else, a new reader, somebody read that, 7 through 11. And there's a couple small minor names in there. I think you got it.
This is the sum of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, and the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt at Beer-lahai.
Lahai-roi, yeah. Beer-lahai-roi. All right, thank you. All right, so what's going on in these verses? There's a couple things. Well, let's just name them. What's going on?
Abraham dies.
Abraham dies. He dies at what age?
175.
175. So even back then, the lifespan is beginning to shrink, but this is still a good amount of years. It says he was a ripe old age. Plenty of years. So 175. He's lived a long life. What else is going on? So he dies.
Isaac and Ishmael bury him together.
Yeah.
So Ishmael is still at least somewhere in the periphery of...
Yeah, it's interesting. None of the other children are mentioned, but you remember that Abraham sent them away, right? East, out of the presence of the Lord and all that kind of stuff. There is some interesting stuff that goes on with Isaac and Ishmael. Now, Isaac is the promised child. Through him, the Messiah is coming. God is blessing his line and all of that. But what did God say to Abraham about Ishmael? Does anybody remember?
He was promised his own.
He was promised his own.
People.
Yeah,
And that his seed would be numerous also.
that's right. There were going to be great nations from him as well. So there is something going on, and interesting enough, we don't see it. We don't see it to the next few verses, but the sons of Ishmael are 12 princes. The number 12 comes up. Jacob has 12 sons, the nation of Israel. Interesting kind of numerical symbolism possibly going on there. But anyways, yeah, there's something about Ishmael. There's something about Isaac. They are not the same, but they got some similarities, and they both come and they bury their father.
It makes you wonder, well, it makes me wonder about the relationship between those two. Did they have any kind of a brotherly relationship?
Well, you remember that the reason Ishmael leaves was because of...
There was some jealousy there in the
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah, there was a lot going on.
I don't know. I wonder about those things.
Yeah, the text doesn't
Did they
say,
ever
but
work
it...
that out as Isaac grew older?
Right. It doesn't say, but there is this this hint where they're both coming together and burying their father. So it kind of, I mean, you could do it and still hate each other, but it kind of lends to the idea that maybe they did reconcile after a while.
Well, they're being separated with Sarah's idea.
Yeah, well, yes, it was Sarah's idea and God's idea in the midst of all that as well. But yes, right. Sarah wanted, and God says to Abraham, go ahead and send him away.
Did it ever say that the two of them were disagreeable?
Isaac and Ishmael, just when Ishmael was mocking
Oh, yeah. Well,
the
They were
child.
young, and you know
Yeah.
how brothers...
Well,
yeah.
Isaac was young. He had just been weaned. Ishmael was,
13.
he was anywhere between 13 and
17, bro.
something like that. He wasn't a child. He was, and remember, culturally, back at this time, that's really adulthood. You're getting married at 16, right? We don't do because remember, a lot of times people died. Life expectancy, even though Abraham and some of these people are living long, there was also a lot of people died early from diseases and sicknesses and things like that. But yeah, they're getting married early. I mean, just to throw this out there, Mary, mother of Jesus, would not have been out of her teens. She would have been young. Yeah, absolutely. So, Ishmael would have been older. It's possible that they reconciled. This kind of gives me the indication that maybe they did. Because sometimes that can happen, too, over the death. We talked about when the death of parents happen, there can be fighting among the children for inheritances and things like that. But they can also bring people together at times. So there's potential here. They do it together, so they are at least agreeable to do this burial. Right.
Just pointing out that I know Isaac was the chosen son and the promised son, but Ishmael was there 12 years earlier.
Right.
He spent a lot of time alone with Abraham, so he's one of
Sure.
them.
Sure.
He was the only son for a long time.
That's right, and he was,
He
yeah.
would have come back to bury his father no matter what.
Sure. So we don't really know, but that happens. And then what does God do with Isaac in these verses? It says God did what? God blessed him. God blessed him. There is a transition that's beginning to happen. The promises, the blessings are now being transferred directly to Isaac. Abraham had those. They were promised to Isaac, but now Isaac is beginning to receive these. There's this transition that's happening from Abraham to to Isaac. What is the significance with the place Beer Lahai Roy?
That's the same place he was when he first saw his wife, wasn't it?
Okay. Yeah, he's been going to this area. Yeah. What else? There's another significant event that happens. Hagar was comforted by God at this place, and both her and Ishmael received the water of life, right? The water that saved their lives at this place. So there's some significance here about the place. This is the place where the living God, the one God who sees, has been present. In the ancient world, at this time, did places have significance?
Yes.
Sure they did. Did Abraham often build places to sacrifice, altars and stuff at certain areas? Certainly he did, absolutely. Later on, Israel will cross the Jordan River, and does anybody know what they put in the middle of the river?
Stones.
Yeah, they put stones. It's a memorial. Places had significance. So this place has significance, a number of reasons, but here God gives Hagar, now it's not Ishmael, but God gives Hagar and Ishmael the water of life, revives them there, and that's where Isaac is blessed. He goes back to. He settles there. The issue with Hagar and Ishmael is in chapter 16 and verse 14, if you're taking notes. That's where God meets them. All right, so there's a major transition. The life of the father of faith, Abraham, has come to an end. And I think it would be fitting for us to look at, and we've got a little bit of time, what the Hebrew writer says. So let's look at Hebrews chapter 11. Verses 8 through 19, we are coming to a major kind of point here in the history in Genesis. At least I think it is.
Well, the chapter.
11?
Oh, yeah, the first one.
Yeah. Hebrews chapter 11, specifically verses 8 through 19. So 11, 8 through 19. It says this, it says, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise as a foreigner in the land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead. Why was he as good as dead? Was that?
He was old.
No, because his wife was barren. His wife, yeah. So he was as good as dead because his wife was barren. Were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven and as many as the innumerable grains of the sand of the seashore. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. The people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had the opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only, right, highlight that, his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. See, Isaac, spiritually, figuratively, however you want to put it, was raised from the dead. And we'll stop there because it goes on to talk about Isaac. But a fitting way to conclude, I think, because that summarizes in a short few verses the life of Abraham. What have we seen? As we pause now, Abraham has died. What have we seen in the life of Abraham? What kind of a man was he? What did we see going on in his life?
It was by faith.
By faith.
He lived by
Right? The Hebrew writer only mentions the victories. Very interesting, isn't it? Did Abraham have any failures? Sure, but the Hebrew writer only mentions the victory. Very interesting. So Abraham was a man of faith? Absolutely. We remember him for that. We remember him for his great triumphs. But he was also a man who wavered at times. He didn't completely abandon God, did he? No. But he struggled with believing, could God get him through this? Could God deliver him from this thing?
He questioned God.
Yes,
he did.
absolutely. He never leaves him, but he questions and he wonders and he ponders and he thinks, maybe I have to help God out. And he does that a number of times. Do we ever...
All the time.
we ever get like that? God, man, how are you going to get me out of this? It's too much for you. Sometimes we do that as well, right? So we can see ourselves in the life of Abraham as well. Great moments of victory. What's the pinnacle that we always look back to of the faith of Abraham? Now you could look at two, but there's really this pinnacle high point. Offering of Isaac, absolutely. He had traveled with God so long. God had been faithful in and out of every kind of circumstance. Even when Abraham was unfaithful, God was faithful, brought him through all this. Now he's at that point where his faith is strong. He's got strength. And God says, take your only son and offer him to me. And he says, nothing, and goes and does it. His faith is strengthened. But it was years. I mean, this is not a short period of time. This is years of God walking with him and he stumbling along with God. Those who are in the body of Christ, who are those who are meant to lead and shepherd the flock of God? Elders. They are meant to be, within the name implies what? There's age. Because, hopefully, Lord willing, they have done what with God?
Walk with him.
They've walked, they've stumbled along the way, they've walked with God, and they're at a point where they have walked with God so long they recognize, doesn't mean that they don't have moments, but that they should be stronger in their faith. They should be people that are able to point others to Christ and walk with others as they stumble and give them that kind of encouragement and that guidance and all of that. So in a very real way, the shepherds, as they have traveled with God through these years, now have experience with God. They have that great faith, and we can look to them, right? Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. In a very real way, the shepherds are meant to be that as well. Just like Abraham, we can look back at him and we can see later on in his life, we want to strive to be like that. We want to be those kind of people who are willing to give everything to God, recognizing that he will take us through whatever comes our way. Absolutely. Okay, anything else? We're out of time, but is there anything else in the life of Abraham that you want to throw out there, that you want to say before we end? How has this journey through the life of Abraham, has there been anything in there that's given you encouragement?
Even though we might question God, like Abraham, God never let Abraham down. Question God, but he's still going to be with us and he's still going to carry us through.
God will walk with us through, right? So we want to grow. Anything else? Okay. Paul, can I have you close us?